Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello everyone. Subsea cables are the fiber optic networks laid across the ocean floor that carry approximately 95% of all intercontinental digital communications, serving as the essential yet often invisible backbone of the modern global internet. Welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. I'm Anusri Suresh, geoeconomics researcher at the Takshashila Institution, and I have my colleague Anvesha Sen with me to discuss and dissect India's subsea cable governance structure, the gaps and the challenges of the ecosystem, and we will be also looking into the solutions that Anvesha is able to kind of work through over the last couple of weeks. Welcome to the episode, Anvesha.
Thanks for having me, Anusri.
Yeah, I will dive straight into the conversation. So given that subsea cables are a critical communication infrastructure as it carries around 95% of transcontinental digital communications and I think around 20% of intercontinental internet traffic India itself is consuming. However, if you look at these statistics, we are only hosting 3% of the world's subsea cables, right? So could you paint a detailed picture of what are India's stakes in this infrastructure as India transitions into a technology hub? What are the gaps and what are India's stakes in this overall ecosystem?
Sure. So it's a fairly interesting question, actually. I mean, when we look at it, these are, as you rightly mentioned, it's a largely invisible ecosystem in the sense that all of it is pretty much underwater, and it's responsible for all of the communication that happens within continents. And so this is communication that cannot be taken up by, for example, satellites. So, instead of looking at other forms of infrastructure that could, play a bigger role in this form of communication, these things have been tried, and currently the capacity simply does not exist to not give this much importance to subsea cables. So when we're talking about India's sort of threats or vulnerabilities in this ecosystem, I mean, primarily we would say that Mumbai is currently hosting a majority of the cables that land in India. So I think we have about 18 to say 20 cables, some of them under construction, I think 2 or 3 of them under construction. And of that, about 15 at least land in Mumbai. Which creates an extreme sort of concentration of landing infrastructure within not just the city, but I think it's about a 6-kilometer stretch on the Versova beach, which is essentially linked to a lot of the west flowing traffic. So secondly, I mean, so we already have an extreme concentration. There are a few other, hubs in other coastal cities which do have cables landing there, but these are very, very far and few. On the eastern coast, we have Chennai, which is another hub, but comparatively much lesser concentration of landing cables. And then there are a couple other cities which have maybe 1 or 2 cables landing. So immediately we have a high concentration of a lot of the cables landing in Mumbai. Secondly, what sort of gets missed out in a lot of conversations perhaps around connectivity broadly is that you have cases where these cables do get cut off by accident through fishing ships or other sort of accidental damage that does occur for a lot of these cables. And it's recorded that on a yearly basis there are about 200 cable cuts that occur, and most of these are accidental. And yet India does not have any Indian flagged repair vessels which can go out into the seas and repair cables in case of a cable cut. So that's sort of another, we're completely dependent on ships that come from Singapore and Dubai for our cable repairs. Third, I think when we talk about manufacturing, and you rightly mentioned that we only host about 3% of the cables, and again, for a country as big as India, that doesn't seem very proportional to, say, the data that we consume and produce. um, and so if we're talking about building more cables, again, there is a near complete dependence on a foreign oligopoly for manufacturing deep sea cable components, so which is essentially your fibers or all the components that go under the water, which is one is fiber cables, then another would be your amplifiers or your repeaters, and then your branching units. So the parts that are actually under the sea, those are things that we don't manufacture. And then I think lastly, if you were to bring it all together, you did mention that this is, subsea cable infrastructure is critical communications infrastructure, and hence should have, at least in a regulatory term, it should have a designation that is appropriate for it, which then also opens the path to bringing a lot of reform, bringing a lot of, improving this ecosystem in a way that supports the criticality of it. And so that would be, sort of designating it as critical national infrastructure, which also is currently missing in the Indian ecosystem. So, broadly speaking, I think this gives a fair overview of what the ecosystem currently lacks. What are the major concerns that we have with the ecosystem right now? And so, just to sort of summarize, we have an extreme concentration of landing infrastructure in Mumbai. There's a complete absence of Indian flagged repair vessels. We're completely dependent on a foreign oligopoly for deep sea cable components manufacturing, and overall we also lack the critical national infrastructure designation for subsea cables.
Yeah. I think just to get a full picture of the ecosystem, I do want to expand this a little bit further. Look, in terms of if you're looking at the capacities or capabilities and expertise that India have, and also to kind of match it against what we lack, can you look at those aspects? What are the capabilities India currently have in terms of the the critical points in this infrastructure? And where we have complete dependence on the players in the market and all those kind of, could you paint a overall picture of the ecosystem?
Sure. So there are, broadly speaking, in subsea cable infrastructure, there are two parts of it. One is the part that's on land, which is the dry plant, which is essentially the cable landing station, which has all the equipment, all the power cables, etc., to process optical signals. So these are power feed equipment. All of these things are generally, I think India does have the expertise in manufacturing it. For example, Sterlite Tech does a bunch of work here. We have land-based networks, etc. And also we do have the capability of building backhaul networks, which are again on land. But the second and the more sort of critical part when we're talking about subsea cables is the submerged part, which is your fiber optic cables, the submarine repeaters, branching units. So fiber optic cables, I think, fairly well understood. But submarine repeaters are essentially amplifiers which are placed every 50 to 100 kilometers, which then boosts signal to help maintain data integrity. And considering that these are intercontinental cable ecosystems, you do need to keep ensuring that the signal remains strong and doesn't get weak over the distance. And the third thing is branching units, which essentially just split optical signals and allow like a larger main trunk cable to serve multiple coastal locations. But I'd like to add a caveat to this. I mean, we do have the terrestrial dry plant and the submerged bed plant, but I think another sort of component that is becoming increasingly important in the overall communications and data infrastructure would be data centers. And so as a result, nowadays we also see hyperscalers play a much larger role within subsea cable, development. And there's, Meta, for example, is building a subsea cable, and then there's a bunch of, Google, Meta, Microsoft. All these companies are sort of participating in this ecosystem a lot more. And one trend that is emerging from this is that initially, like earlier on, prior to say the AI coming into the picture and all of that, we did see subsea cables would essentially be between cities that have a lot of which are like financial hubs of their respective countries. So, for example, for India, that would be Mumbai. And since the cables carry intercontinental data, it made more sense for it to be in tier one cities, in financial hubs, etc. But now increasingly, as you need very low latency in data centers, especially which are used for AI inference and require very very quick data transfer, a lot of these cable landing stations, the new ones, are being planned at data center hubs. In India's example, that would be Vizag. So obviously, most people might have heard that Google is building a gigawatt scale data center there, and also now there is a cable landing station that's coming up there. Similarly, in Gujarat, there are data centers being planned and cable landing stations being planned. So this has become like a third sort of very crucial element of the overall ecosystem.
Yeah. So I think you have already mentioned that, like, around 70 to 80% of cable faults that happens globally are either caused by, like, fishing trawlers or like ship anchors and all those things. However, given the geopolitical uncertainties that are emerging in recent times, like, and especially with the geographical concentration of the landing points that you have already mentioned earlier, this adds certain kind of a vulnerability to this infrastructure, right? Like, what do you think? And in terms of, like, if you're looking at the strategic choke points and other geopolitical and operational challenges in the ecosystem, it kind of adds a lot of vulnerability to this ecosystem where we have already a lot of gaps. I mean, I think there are more gaps than the expertise that we have in that sense. So what do you think about it?
Yeah, I think geopolitically speaking, and also looking at the context we're in currently, I think the biggest vulnerability in terms of the subsea cable ecosystem specifically is one is a lot of new construction of subsea cables is halted because, I mean, coincidentally or not, but a lot of the intercontinental data routes are also trade routes. So, for example, Strait of Hormuz is a trade route as well as a data route, and hence is highly vulnerable. And we have seen a lot of reporting around when there is some sort of tension in that region, it can accidentally or otherwise cause damage to subsea cables. It has happened in the past, but again, there's no way of knowing how cable is damaged. But secondly, I think the construction of newer cables is something that's even more concerning, and there have been cable construction that has been paused for quite a while now because of tensions in these geopolitical regions. And also, given that, and sort of going back to the argument of data centers and hyperscalers coming into the picture, I think to avoid some of these choke points, a lot of new routes are being planned which don't necessarily follow the coast, but rather go through the deep waters. And so those are shorter routes, but would probably be more difficult to construct in, just given the depth of the water there. So those are some things we're seeing companies do to sort of avoid these geopolitical tensions. But apart from that, I think we do occasionally see reports around, what would happen if a cable was intentionally cut, or, as some sort of intentional sabotage. But I think personally, I'm not very sure that would be a way to, you know, sabotage a country's communication systems, because the communication is two-way. And so if a country would want to sabotage a cable, that would also equally affect that same country. And so I don't see that as being a possibility. It seems counterintuitive to be actively damaging cables. But that being said, if there is some damage that is caused, it does increase latency. It can affect communication timelines. And so those are some of the threats around cable damage. But overall, I think a country being completely cut off, unless it's a small country. I mean, it's not something that I foresee happening to a larger country. But if you are a smaller, say, island nation, and these things have happened due to natural disasters in the past, where an earthquake or a volcanic eruption, etc., has caused islands to go completely dark and not be able to communicate with the outside world. So those things do happen. But for larger countries, I think completely going dark is not something I foresee, but there will be increased, communication timelines, increased latency, and so those sort of things are what we need to work towards to reduce. And that's where redundancy comes in, where you have extra cables, and you're able to sort of reroute traffic to cables that are not cut or are functioning perfectly fine. And so yeah, that's, I think, overall what I feel about the geopolitical challenges on cables.
Yeah. So I was going through your paper before this podcast, like on the your paper on the subsea cable governance, and I think one thing that was really interesting for me to find that despite the growth that we have in terms of global cable deployment, the global maintenance fleet has been either stagnant or it's aging. And it's also quite alarming to kind of see that, I think you mentioned it earlier that currently India has around either negligent amount or zero Indian flagged or Indian owned cable repair vessels in that sense. So, and to read it along, mentioned that some of the points that you mentioned about India's regulatory ecosystem that is acting again counterintuitive in the sense that exacerbating the gap in the infrastructure. Um, so could you please expand on this and say why this is a major concern that we have to look at?
Yeah, so I think overall there is this, I think, trend that cables themselves are aging. So on average, I think subsea cable has a life of 25-ish years, and a like a big chunk of the cables, at least the ones that land in India, are fast approaching that end of life sort of timeline. Similarly, a lot of the cable repair ships, they too are sort of approaching that end of life sort of timeline. And so I think, given that it is a very expensive endeavor to manage a fleet which is just there for cable repairs, and perhaps cable laying, and these are things that don't happen very regularly. It's far in between, right? So I think, because as a result of that, there isn't a lot of private or market interest in developing a cable repair fleet and things like that. And we have, I mean, globally there are about 61 active cable repair ships, of which 19 are bound to active maintenance contracts, 26 are for installation, and they're completely occupied with laying down new cable repair subsea cables. And then 16 are sort of in between cable laying and cable repair. And of this, as you mentioned, none of them are Indian flagged or Indian owned or even permanently stationed within the Indian maritime zones, right? And so whenever there is requirement for cable repair in India, the primary providers come from Singapore and Dubai. And as a result of this, and also as a result of the current regulatory ecosystem around getting cable repair ships, the repair timeline typically ranges between 4 to 5 months for India, which is a massive timeline. I mean, it should ideally be a couple of weeks, but it's currently 4 to 5 months. And on the regulatory ecosystem, there are these specific licenses that foreign flagged ships require to transport goods and passengers within another country's domestic borders, which is known as a cabotage license. So even cable repair ships fall under this category, wherein they require these licenses, and obviously that adds to the bureaucracy and like processes around getting these licenses, and then the ship is able to come and repair the damaged cables. So obviously that also adds to the timeline itself. There have been multiple, not just companies or telecom providers, but also I think BIF had also talked about how there should be a simpler way of doing this. Some of these licenses are redundant, and there should be an easier sort of pipeline to permit these repair ships to come in and repair cables, because that again is it's a vulnerability for the country itself if you
Yeah.
have significant cable damage.
Yeah, I think it adds certain kind of delays or bureaucratic loops that could have been avoided in that sense, right? So I think one key takeaway from so far from our conversation is like, along with it's being an infrastructure problem, there's also certain kind of strategic vulnerability in the ecosystem as we discussed this, right? And one of the core recommendations from your paper that I could understood was like, to declare subsea cables as a critical national infrastructure as one of the designation. So I'm just wondering, could you expand on like what that means and what specific emergency protocols or security resources that this designation kind of unlock? So yeah.
Yeah, so I think broadly, if we were to strengthen the subsea cable ecosystem, which we should, I think the first sort of thing that, like you mentioned, unlocks a lot of the security protocols and measures would be to designate subsea cables as critical national infrastructure. So that enables high priority security enforcement measures, such as, for example, the deployment of paramilitary forces to cable landing stations if required, and the establishment of protected cable zones, the activation of a green channel for repair vessel access, etc. Some of the things that we've spoken about. And also, implementing this designation is a necessary prerequisite for security enforcement, emergency protocols, administrative reforms, etc. And this is also something that can be done in the shorter term. It's primarily a bureaucratic process, but then the follow up, in the sense of deploying paramilitary forces, etc., establishing protected cable zones, etc., those are things that will take some more time. It will take money. Requires a budget, etc. So a formal designation would trigger obligations including mandatory security audits, interministerial coordination structures, and liability frameworks, each of which requires a budget allocation and some bureaucratic bandwidth. And for this, I think the Department of Telecommunications is sort of best suited to be able to carry out this sort of process of not just designating I mean, after the designation, following up with the required protocols, etc., to be able to act as soon as required whenever there is some sort of vulnerability, but also not wait for, say, a significant cable cut, but also ensure that there is adequate redundancy, there is adequate protection, whether that's cybersecurity or even physical protection of cable landing stations and the associated infrastructure.
Yeah.
So I think this initial sort of designation is something that unlocks a lot of it and also brings a certain, for lack of a better term, a sense of seriousness around this ecosystem itself. Because I mean, if you perhaps look it up, there are beach manhole covers which clearly sort of state that there's a subsea cable just below, so it's like very easy to access in that sense. But yeah, I think this sort of designation would then provide a lot of the physical security that's also required around these cables.
Yeah. Given that I think there is an externality definitely of like, a possible systemic outage here, either with the accidental or purposeful. What are the other recommendations that you have for state intervention here? Like, what role does state play in terms of like securing this ecosystem and like, kind of trying to keep these vulnerabilities at bay as possible?
Yeah, I think so. Also, to clarify, the need for state intervention here is, like I mentioned in the previous sort of when we're talking about cable repair ships, this isn't necessarily, a lot of this isn't necessarily a profit making business, and so we don't foresee markets being as invested in a lot of the security measures. Definitely, there's hyperscalers, etc., investing a lot in subsea cable development and also the overall sort of digital infrastructure around it. But the fact remains that these cables and the protection of it is also overall a part of national security, and it's better safe than sorry, right? So it's always better to have a robust sort of security system around this ecosystem,
Yeah.
which then sort of brings in the requirement for some state intervention. And also, this is essentially a national asset. So, as you've gone through the paper sort of lays out a bunch of recommendations in a timed or like a roadmap with different timelines. So the first sort of priority would be to be able to survive the first 72 hours of a major cable cut. So uh, uh, the assumption here is that we've picked the worst possible scenario wherein India has, for example, suffered a major cable cut and there's a national sort of connectivity crisis. So what do you do then? So if you're preparing for the worst, then you'll be fairly better off on a regular day as well. So the first sort of set of recommendations are essentially to ensure that India can manage within the first 72 hours. So implementing an emergency quality of service protocol within the first 6 hours, and then repair authorization for a declared fault to issued within the first 72 hours of the fault declaration as well. And also, what's required here is a bunch of the other recommendations are around mapping the inventory that currently exists so that we have a sense of where our vulnerabilities are, what areas require more assets, etc., where can we build more cable landing stations, and for future planning, etc. These sort of an inventory of sorts is required, and then followed by the things we talked about in cable repair, for cable repair ships, easier access to that. um, and then also, given that we have a lot of AI use that's coming in, that also can be used to be able to reroute network from, say, a damaged cable to another. This is also a technical standard that can be imposed through existing conditions. These are fairly quicker recommendations that can be implemented in the shorter timeline, followed by the primary sort of vulnerability we have in terms of concentration. So obviously building a lot more cable landing stations so that you don't have a single landing location that carries more than 40% of the intercontinental bandwidth in the next couple of years. And adding to that, also developing more terrestrial backhaul capacity. So for example, connecting other data hubs such as Vizag to Hyderabad and so on and so forth. So other cities where data centers are coming up, where you have a lot of tech infrastructure, etc., connecting these by land as well. So that you again have a lot more redundancy, and your ecosystem overall, the communication ecosystem continues to work. Followed by building sovereign repair and manufacturing capability. So like we discussed earlier, India again does not have a cable repair ship of its own, and so the idea is to build a cable repair fleet with a public private partnership structure with, say, hyperscalers and telecom providers, and so permanently stationing some of these ships in the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal. And as a result, these ships would ideally be capable of reaching any fault location within the Indian maritime zone within 48 hours. So that significantly brings down cable repair timelines from the current 4 to 5 months to, I think, if a ship is able to reach within 2 days, then that would be at most a couple of weeks. And then followed by also equipping naval and coast guard vessels with modular repair kits And a lot of some of the recommendations also include how we can use tech to better detect cable faults and then deploy repair systems accordingly. So that's one more thing there. And then I think finally, on a longer basis, attracting global cable infrastructure investment from, say, you have a single window clearance for friendly consortia, so that other jurisdictions can help Indian cable landing systems become faster and cheaper to land in rather than neighboring countries. So this is more of a regulatory reform which has the potential for a structural shift in how global cable infrastructure is developed within the Indian Ocean sort of region. And yeah, I think broadly speaking, a longer term sort of outcome would be that India is able to detect, attribute, and deter hostile interference with its subsea infrastructure by 2030. So this again incorporates a lot of fault detection systems, etc., within not just the cables itself or the underlying sort of infrastructure, but also with the Coast Guard and Navy command structures, such that they're able to better protect this infrastructure. So I think broadly that's the roadmap that we've recommended in the paper to be able to meet each of the vulnerabilities that the ecosystem currently has.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Anvesha. I think this was quite insightful. I quite learned a lot about the infrastructure and the ecosystem surrounding the subsea cables. And to our listeners, you can check out Anvesha's recent paper on subsea cable governance in our Takshashila website. Please read and let us know your comments and thoughts on the topic. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.